Hello everyone. For the past couple of months, I've been in a huge music mood. Maybe it's been all the vinyl shopping I've been doing, or helping a friend input his huge collection on the Discogs, but it all has gotten me to look back to why I like the certain music that I enjoy today. And with all this marathoning I've been doing, I thought it would be a neat idea to make a series of videos of me ranking and reviewing artists that I really like. And to give this show a simple start, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite bands of all time, the Beatles. Ever since I was very little, I always liked the Beatles, but it wasn't until a few months ago when I finally decided to listen to all of their main albums. So today, I'll be listing and ranking the Beatles albums from my least favorite to my all-time favorite. So first off, I'm only ranking the core Beatles albums. So, no compilations, no American pressings that just rearrange the tracks, and no live albums. Also, as with pretty much all my videos on the channel, this list is my opinion. My placements will most likely be far different from yours, and that's okay. We all have our different tastes, even within the same artists. So with that said, let's get started with number 13.
So go away, leave me alone, don't bother me.
Now, this album isn't highly regarded to most Beatles fans, and I can totally understand. It's not a terrible album, this just feels very basic. Half of it is original stuff, and half of it are pretty okay covers. To me, the covers aren't that impressive, even though I do kinda like Till There Was You. On the other hand, their original stuff is pretty good, like Don't Bother Me, All My Loving, and Hold Me Tight. I don't really recommend this one because, again, it just feels a little too basic. I feel like the other albums in this era are definitely more worth your time. So, this one's okay, but not good.
I'm a loser, and I'm not what I appear to be.
This one is the one that is commonly crapped on, and I can understand where they're coming from. If you can tell from the album cover, the four were going through Beatlemania. This album was really stressful to make, and it kind of tells in the music. But I put this one above with the Beatles because I kind of have a soft spot for the original stuff here than in the other one. It took me a few listens to really understand the brilliance of I'll Follow the Sun, What You're Doing, and even I'm a Loser, which I feel like are some of the best of the old era Beatles. And I even think the covers here are done a bit better on this album than on With the Beatles, like Rock and Roll Music and Honey Don't. Though to admit, Mr. Moonlight is probably one of my least favorite Beatles songs ever. This kind of has a laid-back, not very rockin' sound because they were all super exhausted, but I don't think it deserves all the hate that it gets. Also, can someone explain to me why George looks like an onion? This album is getting a lot of attention, especially with the new documentary Get Back that just came out, and this seems to be the most polarizing album to people. Some may place it very high because it's the newer age of the Beatles, the writing is more experimental and weird, which a lot of people like. I'm not one of those people. Which is kind of a shame, since this was meant to be the revival of the Beatles, and it ended up splitting the band. Which is very ironic, sadly. There are good songs here. I do enjoy some of the bigger songs like Across the Universe, Long and Winding Road, the title track, and For You Blue. But there are songs like Dig It and Maggie May where I don't need to listen to them ever again. If you are planning to listen to this album, I highly encourage the naked version. The songs sound different because it was from a different producer, and I feel like the song placements are a lot better than on the original release. Like, I'd rather listen to Don't Let Me Down than Dig It and Maggie May. So, this album's pretty alright, and it's got some good stuff, but I highly encourage the naked version of this album. I think you'll get a better experience there. The good old first album. And for the Beatles, it's a pretty nice start. Now, this is the whole all the girls going crazy for the Beatles era. This is the classic rockabilly style that they're most known for, you could say. And especially with this album, I kind of have a soft spot for it. They're not the most creative or the most unique songs. They're just simple listens, and sometimes I like that. I can listen to songs like I Saw Her Standing There, Do You Want to Know a Secret, and Twist and Shout, and be thoroughly entertained. Though once again, there are a couple songs that just aren't amazing on this album. As an overall album, it's a pretty nice start for the band, and I recommend this album as kind of like a period piece, because, I mean, this is the first official studio album from the Beatles, so it's kind of a historical album. Not a lot to say about this one. It's simple old school Beatles, and sometimes I like that.
All the lonely people, where do they all come from?
Of my entire list, this may be my most controversial pick, because Revolver you would see in most people's top 5 or even top 3. And even though it's number 9, I do really like this album. Most people would claim this one as a turning point for the band. They've kind of gone away from the rockabilly boy band sound and have gone a lot more experimental, which is definitely a big plus, and this is a good kind of starting point for this. But this one I'm just half and half on. Like, I'm especially not a fan of George's sitar stuff, even though Tomorrow Never Knows is a pretty interesting song. Though, the big classics that everyone knows, like Eleanor Rigby, Good Day Sunshine, Got to Get You Into My Life, those are amazing. I even like some of the underrated tracks, like I Want to Tell You is a song that I think deserves a lot more attention. It's a great George track. Kind of like with Please Please Me, this one is worth listening to because this one, once again, is really, really historic. And even though this was a big turning point for the album, which gave each of the members their time to shine, to show their writing skills and their instrument playing skills, this one just really didn't grab onto me as much as the other albums. From one controversial pick to another, at number 8 I have Yellow Submarine, also known as the half Beatles, half soundtrack album. And unfortunately, I'm a guy who really likes soundtracks. I've talked about the movie before in my opinion discussion episode about music movies, and I like getting scores of movies that I enjoy. But what really made me want to get this album were the original tracks from the movie. Only a Northern Song is really great. Hey Bulldog is up there in my top 10 favorite Beatles songs, and I've really started to like It's All Too Much, even though I think it's a little long. And then going on to the second half with the score, I think George Martin's score is pretty alright. I actually really like the Sea of Time song, though I completely understand why people don't like it because people want all Beatles. So yeah, this is the album that gets the most shit on from Beatles fans, though I quite like this one. I will agree that Revolver is a better album constructually, though in terms of enjoyment, I would put Yellow Submarine above it. The Beatles' most diverse album, and I think the very middle of the list is the perfect place for it, because I think its diversity is its strength and its weakness. With an album like this, it really is the album where it's like, let's just give each of the writers their own time to write a song and then play it and see what sticks. It is a good idea to give these writers creative freedom to write their songs because it shows their strengths and their weaknesses, which I feel this album really shows. Because for every good song that we get a not-so-good song in return. For every Obla-Di Obla-Da, we get Rocky Raccoon. For every Dear Prudence, there's Long, Long, Long. And this is just me. Some people put this as, like, one of the greatest Beatles albums of all time, and I can understand that. Like I said, I appreciate the variety, because then that means there's something for everyone to enjoy. But with this being a double album, it can be kind of a slog, or you can really enjoy it. But this is worth listening to. With all the tracks I've mentioned, and even some of the underrated tracks, like I'm So Tired and Savory Truffle and all that. So this is a big album that I like, but it can be a bit much at times for me.
Falling, yes I am falling, and she keeps calling me back again.
Of all the rankings on this list, this one surprised me the most. Because this is one of their, once again, one of their older ones. This is actually another soundtrack because it had its own movie. Yet, I find this album to be very good. Like, surprisingly good. Because aside from having its own movie, I don't find this album to be special. Because all the songs here are your typical boy bandish stuff. I mean, you've got Ticket to Ride, The Night Before, Another Girl. But there's something about it done here that makes me really like it. I may be the only one that thinks this way, because this album isn't highly regarded. But I think Help is a very pleasantly simple listen. The songs aren't complex, yet they're a step up from the typical boy band songs you'd hear from their older albums. I don't know how to describe it. I just really enjoyed this one. I think it's worth a listen. Even with the movie, I think the movie's pretty enjoyable too. You could say the White Album is better, but Help is not as exhausting. Which is probably why I put this at number 6, which I still find super weird. Speaking of that, let's get on to the top 5. These are the heavy hitters, the ones that I would recommend the most to anybody. Yes, the ever so famous Sgt. Pepper. This album is pretty great. There's a lot to like about it, but what I like most about it is pretty much the diversity and the layout of the track list. Even though most of the songs flow with each other, each song feels different, yet they phase to each other nicely, probably better than what Revolver and the White Album do. They're ordered nicely, they don't feel out of place, even though I'm not a huge fan of most of the songs, like Within You Without You's kind of the only dud of the album. But I mean, you've got Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, A Day in the Life, Getting Better, With a Little Help from My Friends. These songs are quite up there with some of the best in the Beatles catalog. I also like the concept that it makes it sound like you're watching a live show. All the applauding doesn't feel out of place, and the seamless transitions almost feel like you're listening to it as one big show and not just a collection of songs, aside from the pause that splits side 1 from side 2. So yeah, all the attention and praise this album gets is well deserved, and it just barely made it into my top 5, but sadly, it goes no higher. Now, what do I like more than Sgt. Pepper? What about its sequel? Again, another unpopular opinion putting this over Revolver and such, but I can blame my childhood nostalgia for this because I remember listening to this album a lot when I was very young. And I'm pretty sure this album gets quite overlooked at times. I feel like the songs are a lot better here. They don't flow like in Sgt. Pepper, But I think for this album, it's a bit of a benefit. When they're singles, they're enjoyable on their own. I guess my only dud with Sgt. Pepper is that it would be better to listen to it as an album. Here, you can listen to the songs on their own and still enjoy them as much. I mean, hell, I Am the Walrus is in my top 5 favorite Beatles songs. And even the singles are pretty good. I mean, Strawberry Fields Forever, Hello Goodbye. There's some really good modern Beatles songs here, though I can completely understand why people would put Sgt. Pepper over this one. This one's more simplistic, yet I like how it dives into the more psychedelic sound. Songs like Strawberry Fields Forever and I Am the Walrus sound a lot more crazy and experimental than pretty much most of the stuff from Sgt. Pepper. So this album really does give you an experience while listening to it. So here we go, the top 3, the best of the best, and the ones where you probably want to strangle me the most.
Come together right now over me.
Now this one is a favorite among my peers.
But not for me!
Yet, despite being number 3, this album is really great. It's easily my favorite of all the New Age Beatles albums, mainly because there's something very special about this album. It wasn't the final album to be released, but this definitely feels like the last hurrah for the band. They took all their experiences from the past decade. They're upping their game on writing, they're upping their game on playing the instruments. There's just something super special about this album, and it really shows within these songs. The opening, Come Together, Something, it's literally called Something. Here Comes the Sun, the final 3 tracks, the way it concludes, there's something super beautiful and catchy about it. You get your silly songs, you get your experimental psychedelic songs, you just get everything with this album. Yet it's a shame that it's not my favorite, because I feel like this is one that most people would say is the best Beatles album, but it didn't make my number 1, but it's one of the most famous albums of all time, and for good reason. I highly recommend this one, though there are still 2 more that I slightly enjoy more.
But when I get home to you, I find the things that you do will make me feel alright.
Unlike the other soundtrack albums, I will partially blame the movie for why I love this album so damn much. I love A Hard Day's Night, the movie. It is so entertaining. I still love it to this day. I loved it ever since I was very little, and I feel like that's why I love this album a whole lot. Easily my favorite of the old school Beatles songs. This was probably at the height of Beatlemania. This came out in '64, so they just were on Ed Sullivan. This is now their first motion picture. There's a big deal when this album came out, and I feel like these songs were the best written and the most catchy of all the original songs. I also like the mix of styles with this one. You get your fast and happy love songs like Can't Buy Me Love and I Should Have Known Better, and you get your slow and beautiful songs like I'll Be Back and If I Fell. And those songs really do shine on this album as some of the best of the original stuff. And I will admit, it is hard to listen to this album and not think about the movie, but I do consider this album to really be a Beatles masterpiece. Now, I think this is a very interesting pick, and overall a very interesting album. Now, there are many reasons why I put this as number 1. I feel like personally this is the most consistent. I feel like all the songs fit. There's no bad song. But I also say this is my favorite because I think it's a perfect mix of what the Beatles are known for. Some may say Sgt. Pepper or Revolver was the turning point of the band. I say it's this one because it takes their previous works and turns it into something more progressive and new even. like a mix of styles between the Beatles we knew and what the Beatles were becoming, or were going to become. It was this album where they evolved into more than just a boy band. They were turning into one of the greatest bands in history. And while the tunes may sound simple, such as Drive My Car, Think for Yourself, and Wait, there are songs like In My Life and Nowhere Man, which would be up there as not only my favorite Beatles songs, but some of my favorite songs of all time. This was a huge stepping stone in their careers that really changed the course of their music, as well as the rest of the industry. It's catchy, upbeat, and most of all, I think this album is just beautiful. A weird choice for most people, but Rubber Soul is most definitely my favorite Beatles album. And those are my rankings of the 13 main Beatles albums. It feels good to talk about how much I enjoy this band, since they had a huge impact on my tastes in music. And I'm glad that I'm starting the show with this band, so that later I can start with some newer bands that I've been getting into, which I am just as excited to talk about them as I was talking about the Beatles. So with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. Also, comment down below your favorite Beatles album, Beatles song, or your ranking for the Beatles albums. I'd be very interested to see what you guys say. Consider subscribing for more album rankings as well as other content, and I'll see you all in the next video.